What's up, guys? We are here.
Hello.
How are you all out there in internet land?
Hope you all are doing well.
I paused there as if I was waiting for an audio response from the
Yeah,
people
how are you?
watching our stream. Almost like I forgot this. This is a me and you conversation, and other people are spying on us.
With these webcams that we set up for them to not use.
That does remind me though, because I mean, we'll get to our topic in a second, but
As always, we have to go
the
off topic
original
first.
premise of this whole thing is, hey, we're having these conversations. What if we let people
That's
watch
true.
us have these conversations? Um, but
Audio is clear, video is choppy.
not dropping frames on my.
Eh. Discord did update recently, so maybe it's cranky.
No accounting for Discord. But we are glad you are all here with us today. Got a couple of people already hanging out.
Good to see you all.
We are here for our very regular and
Highly regular.
quickly progressing march
Yep.
through the new Jedi Order.
I mean, we just started last month, really.
Yeah. Totally didn't make a schedule of books that would have put us almost almost all the way through it by now.
Yeah.
which was untenable for any number of reasons. But
We tried.
sure.
To be fair though, I feel like this would have been so depressing if I like the new Jedi Order, but it's just, and here's how all these people died, and here's how all of these people died, and then more people died.
And there are these refugees, and they go to this one planet, and then they on that planet anymore, so they go to this other planet. That's where the Vong attack, so they go to this other planet. Wouldn't you know it? That's where the Vong go. Sucks hardcore to be a refugee. Galaxy far away.
And look, I know that there's any number of in-universe reasons why this doesn't happen. I know this is a hill that I shouldn't die on, but I'm gonna die on it anyway. But every one of the books has this map right in the front. Every one of them, and it drives me crazy. Where is the map? There it is. It has this big old map, and this is where the Vong are invading. And they keep putting, I don't know if any of you can even see this, but they keep putting the refugees right in the Vong path. And then there's all of the space over here where the Vong don't even know these planets exist. And you could put the refugees anywhere over there.
Just draw a straight line from where they invaded to Coruscant.
Yeah.
it's not a real mystery.
What's going on? And it's driving me crazy. It's like, if you guys have seen Prometheus, there's the part where the main chick is running away and the spaceship is rolling, and you're just sitting there screaming, turn to your left or your right, and she doesn't. That's what it's like being a refugee in the new Jedi Order.
Refugee problems of Star Wars.
Star Wars story. Yes.
But yeah, so despite what it might sound like, I really enjoyed.
I did too.
Balance Point.
I did too. I promise.
And it was also, despite what it might sound like, I thought it was a bit happier than most of the books we've read so far.
I mean, obviously spoilers are incoming, but apart from the whole mass genocide in the last 10 pages, it was much more uplifting than the past Vong books have been.
Just ignore mass genocide as going quote Yoda Bauer.
Yep, just ignore the mass. It's probably not the weirdest thing I've said on a stream.
Probably not.
Yes, Darkrai, that is what this book was. I don't know. So I usually live tweet me reading the book, which is how you can tell how long it takes for me to read the book, aka months. But there was a lot of me tweeting about how Jason could not make up his mind.
Well, and I mean that's a fair enough a point to start at. The thing about that gets me is I don't understand his thought process. Um, like
Yep.
I really don't. Like I
Hmm.
don't. He keeps getting these visions, right? Like, and this is like the second or third vision he's gotten, where he rescues the slaves and gets captured. But
Hmm.
like he gets this vision,
Yeah.
and in the vision, like he sees the whole galaxy. The galaxy is on like this tipping point towards death and darkness. Which is exactly the kind of visions I get.
All the time.
uh,
Especially when I drink Gatorade before bed.
but I was gonna say when I eat ice cream before.
Like,
But and then Luke tosses him a lightsaber and he misses it. And because he misses the lightsaber, that means that the galaxy is doomed, which must mean, of course, obviously, that means, hey, I have to not be a Jedi or use the Force anymore.
exactly.
It's just clear path from point A to point B there
Yep.
in Jason's mind.
Yep.
And I just don't, yeah, like, yeah, Dark Ride, that's obviously where like the balance point imagery from the
Right.
title comes in. But like, I just don't understand the thought process. I don't understand, like, obviously it's a disturbing dream, but I don't
Right.
understand like how that dream is interpreted to mean don't use the Force.
Right. I mean, it's like the cover of the book. I'm assuming that's Jason, who's like, no.
I always assumed that was, um, oh, I'm blanking on the character's name from Quantum Leap.
No.
Like that's like the image from the credit sequence in Quantum Leap. Sam Beckett, yeah,
Yep. That's 100%.
stepped into the
100%.
Quantum Leap
Yep.
generator and set
Oh
right
boy.
what once went wrong. Hoping his
Oh
next
man.
leap will be the
Well,
leap home. This is a Quantum Leap podcast now. Um,
yep.
thanks for joining us on our new Quantum. Like I could talk Quantum Leap legit for another hour. Great TV show, but
I
it's
mean, we would be making a quantum leap.
there you go. But like, so what do you make of that? Like, that's one of the biggest plot lines in the book is Jason's
Right.
whole, like, and I love the scene too. We can talk about this separately, but like one of my
Hmm.
favorite scenes in the novel is when Jaina shows up to rescue him because he's been kidnapped and
Yeah.
doesn't realize he's been kidnapped
Yes.
because he's
That
just like
chapter can.
he's in his hotel room on Duros just flipping through HBO or whatever, thinking that they're gonna come back and negotiate with him, and Jaina shows up and
Oh,
like, no, you've been kidnapped and I'm
kidnapped.
here to rescue you because there's a riot going on in the street. And he's like, "Oh, really? I had no idea."
Oh, that chapter gave me life. Just added 10 years to my life. Yeah, so my thing what I think's happening with Jason is in a weird sort of way, he on like a micro level is going through what the Jedi are going through in the prequel era. Cuz like basically what happened is he encountered something with the Force that didn't make sense and was difficult to deal with. So he went, "Well, then I'm just going to not deal with it." Um and that's largely what the Jedi did with visions, what the Jedi did with emotions, with all of that stuff. And there's a part of me that feels like Jason so badly is trying to figure out who he is. And a big part of his identity is feeling like he is this solo Skywalker heir and he has to like live up to it, which as an aside, I was tweeting out every reference of the solo children counting as Skywalkers just for all the people who like to claim that Kylo Ren isn't a Skywalker because that's not how genetics work, but okay. Anyway, so he's trying to live up to this, but the thing is like he doesn't know who he is, and Jason's character to me has always felt like a character who doesn't know the right thing to do, so he's doing what he thinks is the right thing to do. So to him, he's encountered something that's scary. He doesn't want to admit that he's afraid to use the Force, afraid to um to deal with what's going on, afraid that he could have some sort of significance. But rather than admit to himself or to anyone else that he's afraid, he's like, I am just going to be wiser than everyone else. And now it's not that I'm not afraid. It's not that I'm afraid. Stop saying I'm afraid. What it is, I'm just smart. Like
Right.
it just that's what every part of his personality.
Even though
Yes,
my
Sin. I
even though
agree.
my uncle, who is the Grandmaster of the Jedi Order,
Right.
is saying, "Hey, that doesn't make any sense." um, but like the thing, like it also, I mean, maybe it's the product of Balance Point being written like in our real life timeline when it was, because
Right.
like to us, and I can't
Well,
see how it
listen.
would have been different when the book came out, but um he says I'm not gonna be a Jedi, but I'm sure as heck gonna hold on to my lightsaber because
Right.
that doesn't have any connection with me being a Jedi. It's just a cool sword that I get to carry around,
I
for
had
kicks
yeah.
and giggles. Um,
Oh, the like Jedi, like the Orthodox Jedi in me was screaming, "All right, Mister Jason Solo, then you can just give up your lightsaber and give it to your uncle." Then,
I mean, it's
um,
like if you're a police officer on every TV show ever, and you show up at your
mhm.
captain's office and like, here's my badge, I'm turning it in, and they're like, no, you got to give me that gun back too, and they're like, no, I think I'm gonna keep the gun.
Yeah,
The gun's kind of awesome. I'm just gonna keep that here in my pocket. Um, like I just don't understand like, and I think that's part of my confusion about Jason too, and I get that
yeah,
it's just angst. He's trying to
yeah.
figure out what he is, and he's afraid and doesn't realize he's afraid, and he's on his way to a lot of things
Hmm.
that are fated for him. So he's getting these visions and things, but I mean, maybe it's a bad inclination to want to look for logic in a teenager's reasoning.
Right.
When he's having the biggest angsty moment we've ever seen, like I think of all the comments about Kylo just raging out on, you know,
Right.
whatever panels are near him with his lightsaber. Like
Yeah.
that's the like if there's a more emo equivalent of that where you just sit in a dark room, like that's what
Right.
Jason is doing through this whole book.
He's just and like I like how even he's trying to like when they're fighting the bug things in the one city, and he's like, "I'm gonna use the lightsaber, but not use the Force," and he's like, "This is hard." I'm like, yeah, there's a reason why. And then at the end, he like turns into Captain Planet or something, and I don't like he's just like, okay, well, because Leia gets kidnapped, and I had forgotten how wrecked she gets in this book.
Yeah, she almost
Um,
died.
yeah, and almost loses her legs, which is a big part of recovery.
She does lose her hair.
Does lose her hair. Most of them did. I've been really curious. I wanted to look. I don't know if they're on the cover of any of the other books, but I'm like, how soon does her hair grow back? Like, are they gonna have like shaved head Leia on a book cover somewhere?
I'm sure back to which can like regrow arms can also regrow
Grow
your
your
hair.
hair faster.
Just put it in a spray bottle and just spritz it on every. Um,
I love it. It's literal hairspray.
but yeah. Um, and I did, since you mentioned the whole like plastic eating.
Yeah,
Um, One, I think it's interesting that the using Vong came up with a solution for pollution. Since you
yeah.
mentioned Captain Planet, um, you think we could have
He's a hero.
embraced that.
He's
Um,
gonna take pollution down to zero.
but what do you think about Nominor's kind of whole plan to like portray one of the scientists and undermine everything they've got going on? And he's gunning specifically for the Jedi in a way
Yeah,
that most of the Vong don't seem till the end of it.
right. Nam is a very interesting character because he's been there uh since Vector Prime. And he's the reason Mara got sick, and it was really interesting to see him and Mara face off again. He's just kind of like this weird reoccurring villain. Only they don't know that he's this reoccurring villain because they thought he was dead.
Well, they didn't know he was Vong to start with
That's right.
because he was portraying a human, just
On
anti
Rock
technology,
Manu or wherever. Yeah,
and so he faked his death to kind of start the conflict
that's right.
there at the
It
beginning.
was so long ago. But and that he's just interesting. He's this like mad scientist that follows them around, and uh, it, he it's in a. I mean, like I think the War Master's been around a little while now too, but I feel like the Vong landscape is always shifting so much. I can't keep track of everybody, but like to have this reoccurring villain adds a little bit of that. And what's interesting to me is too, and Nam is a perfect example, is for a culture that is so zealous and so intense with their philosophy, they too have a lot of hypocrisy. Uh, and Nam is one of the first characters where you kind of start to see that, where they're supposed to be worried about honor and just like battle for battle's sake or what have you. And Nam's one of the first to really get personal, along with Shai, who duels Koran, and now finally the War Master. And even with the War Master, like he was mocking Jason the whole book, calling him the coward Jedi for not using the Force, and then he retreats at the end of the book. So I mean, but they had an excuse as to why it wasn't really a retreat, though. Uh, like the Vong have their own problems for sure.
And it just, I liked that it was different enough in this book
Mm-hmm.
because it feels like, oh, it's, you mentioned this earlier, it's one of the downside if we were just, that
Right.
it gets pretty depressing.
Yeah.
And the Vong, managed to win again, as the Wikipedia article, says, obviously, they win again. Of course they do. But it's different this time, and they have to work for it in a
Mm-hmm.
way that they didn't have to before, and their plans don't necessarily work out perfectly. Nominor gets found out, and he has to
Yep.
reveal himself, even,
Mm-hmm.
um, to Jaina and Mara down in the tunnels.
Yep. The secret tunnels.
Yeah, secret tunnels through the planet that nobody wants
Planet.
to live on. Um,
Yep. That's exactly. Yep.
and it shows, one, that the Vong have a more complicated plan than just show up and take over planets.
Yep.
Um, but also shows, like you said, that there are different motivations between the Vong, among the Vong.
Mm-hmm.
It's the caste system that they have has like showed its head, but it's not like gotten as complicated as it's going to get before the end. Um, that's any consolation. I don't know. I keep having to like pull up the flow chart that I can find on like who answers to who in the Vong.
Right.
We would play
Uh,
that song if we could, but we that's like the one of the claims we've ever gotten was because I used that one time in a video. Um, after
and
you
I
had
used
used it like a dozen times.
times, so I don't know why I hated you, but whatever. And no, with the O2, it was showing kind of the long game plan, because I feel like prior to it had been the Vong going to just the planets on the edge of the galaxy, and then kind of making their way in on the path of least resistance, and then they were kind of going around Hut space, but also taking Hut space, and there was the whole Thane with Corellia and everything before. But this time it seemed like this was a planet they really wanted, and that was the big tension. Is now that they have Duro, they are in the core. Like that's how far in they've come. And for those of you who know what happens in 3 novels, it's going to get a lot more intense before it starts looking up. But it was interesting to see that, and because of that, they had this long play, right? Like they were working on a deal with the planet, and and that sort of thing, and as opposed to just kind of brute force taking a world. Like, yeah, you had Nam's plastic eating moths and stuff, but really this was a straight coup.
Right.
It wasn't we're gonna put a Yamask anywhere or crash a moon or anything.
Well, and it's interesting too because we're starting to see, and this has been a plot line all the books so far, but it's
Hmm.
not just about conquest. It's also about undermining the political stability of the New Republic.
Right.
And I think that's an interesting point here too, with we know, and not too many other people know the extent to which Senator Shesh is like completely sold out to the Vong,
Yep.
and is on like the ruling council of the New Republic,
Mm-hmm.
and Recovery kind of gets at that a little bit more specifically.
Yep.
Um, but like, there's a lot of moving pieces here, and it's not just a simple, conquest. It's more complicated. Like
Mm-hmm.
the whole deal with the Huts that
Yep.
the Vong were never going to honor. You know,
Right.
they got an excuse not to honor it because Rando was trying to do some backroom deals between the New Republic and the Huts and the Vong and the Huts all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially ratted everybody out to everybody else. But
Right.
but it's a lot of complex political stuff. Is really well done. It's not so much a political thriller the way that a book like Bloodline,
Right.
or even the kind of politics that we see in Aftermath.
Mm-hmm.
But I like it a lot as somebody that cares about politics.
Yeah. Or even the kind of plays that we would see in Jedi Lost.
I already had this ready, just waiting for it because that is this week's obligatory Kevin Scott reference.
Woohoo!
Um,
Okay, but I feel like just give it time though, because that was what we referenced last time. I'll bring up one of his other works. You just give me a chance.
we'll start working Crater in there
Yeah,
whenever we
exactly.
can. Jackson, we'll find some Jackson that we can work. I know nothing about Jackson apart that he's a
The
um
big green rabbit specifically.
um
He'll be so happy, or he'll be severely creeped out. I haven't determined which one it is. To be fair, we got a very neutral. I don't know what to say when he saw it last time. So
your response to that was perfect though.
as long as it's not cease and desist. Oh man, that made you feel for a hut. Yeah, right. Rando was bothering me most of the book, but then in the end, I felt for him. But I know you liked him a lot more than I was enjoying him.
Well, I don't know. He's not my least favorite Hut. What's his
That's
name
fair.
from the Clone Wars?
No, no, I will
Um,
fight you.
I prefer the little baby that they have to rescue in the movie to
Rada's cute too. No,
um
Zero
no.
is my hero.
I'll take actual Truman Capote, please. Truman Capote the Hut. Um, but anyway, but no, it was funny though. I mean, it's not funny. It was a nice moment at the end when he
Yeah,
does. Yeah,
yeah,
darker eyes with me.
but it has an I, not an E.
Grow to zero. But um, there's so much going on there too because like the whole refugee situation. We talked about it briefly. Like
Yeah,
that's become a political scenario on literally like every planet we've seen. Because the New
right.
Republic is like the Vong is taking over these planets. These people have
Hmm.
to go somewhere.
Yep,
Where are they going to go? Vong are following the refugees because they're
yep.
using them for
For
ritualistic sacrifices. Uh,
or to make into drones.
yeah, and um, and so on Duro, it's a complicated little situation there because you have
Yep.
like the leaders of what's the shipping company? I forget the name of
Durocore, something like that. I
it.
think
Or
it's
Duro or
Durocore.
something like that. Um, but they've like made arrangements with the Vong to like sell out the refugee population. So like the
Right,
planet agreed to let the refugees come because the Duros don't care about the actual planet. The planet is a garbage heap that was
right.
ruined over like
Long time
centuries of
ago.
industrialization. And so they don't
Core Duro. I had
or
it
Duro.
reversed. Sorry.
So like they don't care about the planet. So on the first hand they're like, "Sure, come stay here." And then
Hmm.
Corduro is like, "Well, now that all these refugees are here, maybe we can use them as leverage to
Right.
like save ourselves from the Vong," which
Yep.
hasn't worked for anyone yet. And I don't
Right.
know why people keep thinking that will help. Um,
That it will in one day be a thing. Well, and I was going to make a point, and it completely went out of my head.
That does happen. But then you also have like the whole like anti-refugee movement going on
Yes,
board,
that's
which
what
is
I was going to say.
also like partially legit, but partially being promoted by Corduro because they want to
Right.
like legitimize their decision to sell out the refugees.
Yes.
So I mean, it's a lot of back and forth there.
Well, and what I've found interesting about this book, or really the series as a whole, because like in the past we had talked about how there was the super weapon discussion and how interesting that was because the Vong are a case where um, you don't have like innocence. And changing that discussion. And in this case, with the refugees, it's an interesting discussion because it's not just displaced people going to a more fortified world, I mean, it is that, but it's also what you said, where the Vong want the refugees. Like usually in a war, yeah, the attacking force, the invading force might want to kill people, but it isn't about swallowing up refugees. So it's not just the debate of are you going to help people out? Are you going to provide a home? Are you going to provide food? Are you going to sacrifice that? You're also weighing the safety of your own people by taking in the refugees, which is where my plan of moving them to the actual other side of the galaxy comes in. But we're not going to talk about that again. But anyway, but then it becomes this thing. And then, of course, with Duro, it's in something entirely different because the government there wanted to use them as leverage, so they didn't have good intentions anyway. But you could be a well-intentioned planet that isn't actually evil and be unsure that you want to take in refugees because you're inviting the Vong to your doorstep if you weren't already in the warpath. And that can sound cold until you have millions of your own people and you have to decide, is do you want to is it actually ethical to risk all their lives without asking them?
Well, and then you, on top of all that, to make it even more complicated, you have Cellcore, which
Mm-hmm.
is like refugee organization that is part of the New Republic, but also operates
Yep.
separately from it to some
Yep.
degree. And we saw in the last book that they were housing some of these refugees on places where they knew they were being taken advantage of.
Yep.
I forget the name of the planet where Han was in the last book,
Oh yeah,
where
yeah,
they
yeah.
went to save the Ren, and they found out that they were like being forced into indentured servitude, more or less.
Right. It was basically a racket where you would get refugees and then move them to another world. And it was just to do that or to give them to the Vong. Like it was a very corrupt system.
Right, but it's also the system. Like that's who Leia's working for, is Stelcor, and
Yeah.
that's also who Han is working for too. We can talk about that
In
fun
a minute. Yeah.
little thing in a minute too. But it's this really politically complicated thing, and I like that. One of the things that I think is good about having a 19 novel series is that it
Mm-hmm.
allows you to build some of these complexities over the course of these novels, where
Mm-hmm.
it would never be that complex, even if you had like a trilogy of, because
Right.
you don't have the amount of space and time to cover that many different intricate details. But because
Right.
like the whole thing with Nominor is a callback to Vector Prime, because the Senator Shesh stuff has been building through the last couple of books, and
Mm-hmm.
like, and you got the War Master on the more direct conquest stuff, but then you've also
Mm-hmm.
got Borsk Fela wanting to like make sure that Bothwai is protected, and
Right.
selling out Corellia, or all these different kind of complicated things are done pretty well. And it would
Yeah.
be an easy thing, I think, and maybe other people disagree, but it would be an easy thing to let get out of hand, and I don't feel like it does.
Right. You can kind of follow all of it. And at some level, I have not read all of the post Return of the Jedi stuff that you would argue is something to be read before this. Like I've never read the Corellian trilogy. I've never read Black Fleet Crisis. But I have enough knowledge of the expanded universe to kind of know when somebody's like, "Oh, that person acts like somebody from Kuat." Like I have that at a level of what Shesh is like because I just have that kind of cultural understanding. But I feel like even without that, there is you can kind of get it. Like she's the prim, proper, ruthless one.
Right.
um, and Borsk is the wily one, and that sort of thing. The character I was really liking, who's not in it very much, was Kent Hamner, who was like handling the council for Luke, and like Luke calls him in the middle of the night, and he's like, "What do you want?" It's like, "I need you to send the army here." I can't do it, Luke. Like this book had so many big dramatic things, and then there were just so many like little cute vignettes that I love so much.
So, Darkrai, if you haven't read the Corellian trilogy, you basically got the gist of it.
Yeah,
Center point,
Farrakin Sal Solo.
more or less got. I mean, it's worth reading if you haven't. But it's interesting too because I think if we can pivot to kind of some of the personal moments a little bit, I like like the Luke and Mara thing, and sort of Luke and Mara and Anakin to a certain extent are
Mm-hmm.
kind of one like little group of characters that's doing a thing. Then you've got all the Solo family stuff that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of going on. It's a little bit separate. So I know there's a lot of stuff to say about the Solo family stuff. You could do the Luke and
Well,
first.
the big thing is there's now another character in the works. So Mara's preggers. She knows she's having a boy. Um, I mean, I know who her son is because I know things, but um, I'm it's exciting, and it's again, we were talking about with the 19 book series is, right all the way back to Vector Prime, when Mara was really ill, she could feel like the disease going in every part of her body. uh, Sorry, I'm reading chat. um, and she mentions that it's affecting like her uterus and stuff, and to get super biological. And like when I read that book the first time, even then I knew she was going to get pregnant eventually, just because I knew things about the expanded universe. I was not blind when I read it the first time, and so it was a pretty obvious foreshadowing. Then, well, it's obvious. It's an obvious. It's obvious in hindsight foreshadowing, uh, and it's an exciting thing. And I think what's good about adding in a child is I love Mara Jade. I adore Mara Jade. She's one of my favorite Star Wars characters of all time. And I was telling you before the stream, though, her thing is Mara is right about everything except herself. She is the one thing she's often wrong about. And what was going on in this book after she found out she was pregnant was she is always so against Luke being protective of her, wanting to help her, being concerned for her. But as soon as she became pregnant and had their child, then Luke has a little bit more of a right to go, I know I need to give you space, but you have our son, and I have a right to worry about our son. And her to realize, oh, I can't be independent because right now I'm not independent. I am directly responsible for the health of another person. And to see Mara kind of juggle that, I think it's finally making her figure out some stuff about herself.
I think so too. And the moment that Darkrai says is morbid was actually
Yeah,
one of my favorite parts of the whole book because I mean I
it
didn't
was
read
so
it
Mara.
as morbid, but I read it more as Mara is like, there's a there's a strange clump of cells growing in my uterus. What could that possibly be? Um,
I have no idea.
but um, this book, while we're on sort of a relevant subject,
Mhm.
also makes no bones about the fact that Luke and Mara are close with
Yeah,
some. I mean, we see them getting not as close as they'll get uh, um
later.
later, but um
But well, there was the one part where I'm like, you two know Anakin's coming back, right?
some PDA going on in the
That part
NJO.
where they were recharging each other.
Yeah, Heat recharging.
They were recharging, and I'm like, your nephew is probably not gonna knock before he enters. I'm just saying, leave at least 5% of your force senses out
If
somewhere.
they were having what I think ought to be called Callista time.
Yes, that's fair.
And a mommy Jedi and a daddy Jedi love each other very much. Um, but but Luke, coincidentally, I feel like is the character that we see the least of
Yeah,
in this novel. I mean, especially given that he's there the whole time,
yeah,
which was different than the last novel because like Luke and Mara weren't really there at all.
right.
Like he's around the whole time, and he does the little like staged fighting with
Which
Anakin,
was
and
cool.
he's still trying to figure out like what to do about a Jedi Council and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
to be present, he doesn't really do a whole lot like, plot wise. Although like it is cool that he can like sense Mara a long distance, and they can like um um that they can sense each other from long distance, like have some sort of form of communication. She was underground. She could like, no, we're things have gone south here, but we're okay.
Yep,
Um,
yep.
don't try to come down here. We're just buried underneath the surface
We're
of the
all
planet.
fine here now. Thank you.
Yeah.
How are you?
um, but anything else Luke and Mara ish to talk about before we move on to
Well, I think
solo family drama?
with Luke, I feel like part of the reason why he wasn't in it as much is he actually had like the least amount of drama
Yeah.
in that sort in that sense. Um, and that is also the advantage too of having all of the books is you can take time to focus on the different characters. And I think it is showing Luke in a role where I think in a way he's kind of he's aware, that he's Luke Skywalker and he needs to go and help, but he's also aware that he needs to let other people do their part. He seems to be a little bit better at that than his sister. I feel like Leia is the one who's really good at the actual diplomacy and actually knowing what to do, maybe more than Luke is, but Luke is the one that's better at compartmentalizing, if that makes sense, or at least this version of Luke.
Well, and it's so funny to me too because Leia is so good at knowing the right thing to do and managing a situation that she
Hmm.
doesn't recognize that her husband is the one that's giving her grief um,
That was
from
another part I
from
loved.
the next refugee camp over.
Yep,
So like Han has come from rescuing the Ren and
yep,
is like the default administrator along with Jason and Anakin of one refugee center, while Leia is like in charge of the main one. And
yep.
there in the first like half of the book, there's a lot of back and forth. Like, I can't believe they won't give us the resources we need. I can't believe they're demanding so many resources. And it's
It
like,
was
oh,
great.
that's my husband over there. I didn't know.
And it was I enjoyed the fact that they seemed to fight the same when they didn't know it was each other.
Yeah.
Like it's just they really do elicit those reactions out of each other so naturally.
I mean,
Um,
and I like that, and we see this more in Recovery, I guess, is when we get to kind of the climax of it. But I like that Han and Leia finally worked through most of their issues enough to be in the same place with one another. Because the
yes,
last time they were together, Leia basically told him, if you're gonna be this way, you can't be here right now. He's
right.
like, fine, I'll go be somewhere else then.
Yep.
And I like that, especially like I said, by the end of Recovery.
Yeah, recovery that to me was the biggest part of recovery. I had a little bit of a hard time following the story of recovery. But I think that was largely because it coincides with the next two books and it's probably connecting to that story. Um, but the emotional through line at least was really nice, and you at least saw the Han and Leia resolution, though not necessarily what we're going to see with their kids.
Well, and I like that. That it's not done in like a way that is just, oh, this is automatically better now. They have to
Mm-hmm.
talk it and kind of argue it out. So like
Mm-hmm.
tell Leia, Leia tells Han, you've been a child and you abandoned your whole family so that you could go have a pity party,
Yep.
not realizing that you leaving was making it worse for everyone else. And Han was like, you know, you weren't there for me in the way I needed you to be there for me at the time, and so like I went and got drunk for a couple of novels, um,
Right.
and then went off with my new bird friend, um, but they were able to kind of figure out what each of them needed from each other,
Right.
especially with like Leia's like literal recovery with
Yeah.
her legs and stuff, and like the chair, like trying to figure out like what that like if she gets permanently confined to that chair, like what is that going to do like for their relationship and for like their lives. Han is like, I'm in it. I think it,
Mhm.
it does a lot to see that relationship mended.
Yeah, and with recovery, I really liked that we saw both of their perspectives and how they both felt like the Vong had caused them to lose each other, even though they were both very much still there.
And then in other solo family drama, still
Mhm.
you have Anakin who
Yep.
just gets all sorts of the crap dumped on him. Because
Constantly.
he blames himself and Han blamed him for Chewie's death. And
Yep.
then he blames himself for, the massacre that happened in the last novel, which,
Mhm.
the massacre happened and then saved the day also. Um,
Right.
he blames himself for not massacring people more effectively and specifically using super weapons. But um but his story though gets kind of shortchanged, I feel, in favor of his parents and his sibling family drama.
Yeah. Well, he's had a lot on his shoulders for being the youngest solo. And part of that is it, they really wanted to make Anakin the next central figure, which it eventually becomes Jason for out of universe reasons. The famously, they were going to try to have Anakin fall to the dark side, and then George Lucas was like, "No, we're not going to have two dark side Anakins. That's too confusing." And so then they shifted that plot over to Jason eventually, which I'm with you. I really want to know when that decision was made because right now I can see that as being the eventual path. I just don't know if that's where it started. But Anakin's dealing with a lot. I feel like as always, all three solo kids are dealing with their own stuff. Like Jason is having this weird angst trip, and then Anakin is dealing with feeling like he's responsible for absolutely everything, and then Jaina is the only one that like in terms of the force, in terms of life, in terms of everything, she's so far and ahead of everyone. Like she's in Rogue Squadron, she's doing great as a Jedi, she's doing all of this stuff, but um, emotionally, she is really struggling from. She's really struggling from. I think being so far ahead. I think she is so mature and so ahead of the game that people just expect that of her. And when she wants to panic, um, or not necessarily panic, but when she wants to be weak, she doesn't feel like she can be because she's supposed to be the one that isn't.
I mean, and even when she's literally been blinded,
Yeah.
people still expect her to just be the one that can just handle everything. And,
Yep.
and I can see where that um can weigh on a person a lot. I've never been a teenage girl before, so I there's part of that experience that's lost on me. But I think there's a lot to it. And one thing you said when we were talking before the stream started too
Mhm.
was that it's very easy to overlook the fact that the solo children are still children.
Yep.
Um, and I think that's an important thing to remember here, that we as an audience, but also in universe, the galaxy is expecting a lot of them because of
Yep.
who they are, all having to deal with that in different ways. And, for Jason, it's the question of, if I'm going to be a Jedi, do I just, go be a hermit Jedi somewhere, and be essentially what apparently people wanted the Jedi to do during the Clone Wars from
Yeah,
our
apparently.
discussion last week, is just go off and have kumbaya time by themselves.
Yep.
Um,
We were getting that so many times, and I'm like, That's what Jason's trying to do, and it's not working.
And then you got Anakin dealing with all this guilt, but also
Yep.
like Anakin's being taken under the wing of Luke too, which is a different kind of thing. But then, like with Jaina, her
Hmm.
big thing, apart from being always smarter than her brothers,
Every time.
which is fun to see. Like she has a lot
Hmm.
of hang-ups with Leia because she feels like her mom abandoned her to
Yep.
save the galaxy, and it's so interesting to see that play out because Jaina is like, it's not just that she's expected to be on top of the things. So often she is on top of everything. And then as soon
Hmm.
as Leia walks in the room, it's a completely different dynamic.
Yep.
Because um, she's got those issues that she can't quite make sense of.
Yeah. The way Jaina feels to me with Leia is, to go off of what Sin was saying, that she forgets that she's still so young.
Yeah.
I don't know that I agree with that. I think that Jaina thinks she can't be young anymore. I think Jaina feels like, as much as she's proud that she's in Rogue Squadron, as much as she's proud that she's a Jedi and all of these things, I I feel like I mean, she was so upset that her family didn't even know she was injured, even though she was also trying to play off that injury is not a big thing. I feel like she's somebody who wants to be the older, old for their years, wiser person, unless it's her family and really with her parents. And with Leia, I think it's a case of she wants Leia to be her mom, and she wants to be able to feel like she's young with her mom, and she can't. And I think that's where that resentment comes from.
I mean, and it's strange too because her relationship with Mara
Hmm.
is a lot better relationship than her. But Mara also, I don't feel like has like over tried to become her mom. Like
Right.
she's the cool aunt camp counselor that teaches her
Hmm.
how to do cool Jedi stuff.
Yep.
But she still wants her mom, and I don't think that that's a bad or like wrong impulse to say, I want you to stop saving the galaxy for. Well, that's not
Right.
that different than Anakin needing Han to be his dad.
Right.
But because Anakin is younger, and because we expect Jaina to be the one that doesn't have problems, I feel like a lot of times we as an audience see Jaina differently. So I know
Hmm.
that sometimes I feel like I gave her a kind
Hmm.
just because that's kind of expect from her.
Yeah. And just in seeing that, I really love their sibling dynamic. I think between the three of them, it works so well.
Right?
Um, I have a soft spot for sibling dynamics. It's part of why I like the Adventures in Wild Space series so much, um, which was written by Tom Huddleston and Kevin Scott. But anyway, you should all check that out. There's reviews of it on the channel. But no, in seriousness, I do like how they play off of each other, and it would be so easy to just make them all rivals with each other. Or
Right.
we saw the rivalry between Jason and Anakin, but we also see it play off um, in this sort of weird, like Jason's trying to mentor Anakin, and Anakin doesn't want it. I think he knows that Jason's kind of full of BS
Right.
at some level. Not that he necessarily knows the right answer either. He just knows that Jason isn't right. Um, and I like seeing how the three of them play off, and like different moments where Jason's been more like emotional with Anakin, and then sometimes it's Jaina, and then you get to see moments where the twins are really being twins, like the point where Jaina has to go rescue Jason, and he doesn't even know he needs to be rescued because he's that dumb. Um,
Well, and
like
it's interesting too between that dynamic between the two of them because Jaina has been literally blinded,
mhm.
and like Jason is choosing a certain type of blindness,
Yep.
and I don't think that irony is unintentional
Yeah.
in the book either. But it does make for an interesting interplay, especially when, in other novels and even at the beginning of the NJO, a lot was made of the fact that because they are twins, they have a even closer like relationship in the Force
Mhm.
than other Jedi's would have
Right.
with one another. And
Mhm.
you start to see the strains on that.
Yeah, and I liked the parts where, they were sneaking around and Jason is aptly calling himself a hypocrite because he's only getting around because his half-blind sister is using the Force.
Right. Yep.
And he's just like there's a small part of him that is aware how ridiculous it is. These things that he's doing or not doing. Um, but it was always interesting to see how they play.
And then, to talk about the end of the novel a little bit,
Mhm.
they get a victory against the War Master, but then still like lose the battle essentially. And
Mhm.
at the end of the novel, which sets up the plot of the next novel, but also Recovery,
Yep.
the War Master makes a deal with the New Republic and says,
Yes.
if you'll just hand over all of the Jedi,
Mhm.
then we're good. We'll we'll not want to conquer all of you and make you our slaves. If
Right.
you will just please give us your Jedi. Um,
And there's a part of me that said this would be an interesting moral quandary, and what would the Jedi do in this situation? And then I was like, yeah, but the Vong are never going to honor this agreement.
right.
So there really isn't an interesting moral quandary because the Jedi could hand themselves over and it wouldn't matter. So I'm hoping it's going to create some interesting interplays going forward.
Are there any other things that you want to hit on or talk about before we start to wrap things up?
Well, Darker, I wanted to know if we were going to talk more about the bugs. There were a lot of different kind of bugs. There were the moths, and they're like the big, like wild boar sized bugs. That was another thing I tweeted about that I thought was really funny when Jason was on his whole like I'm not going to disturb life kick, and he found like the one bug that had made the nest in someone's possessions.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm not going to kill it because it's just protecting its nest. I'm like, okay, you get to tell refugee number 25 that you didn't get her great grandnana's scarf because you were respecting the life that made a nest out of it.
Did think it was an awful shame that all the Ren got shaved too.
Yeah, it was nice that everyone else was kind of going for the same in solidarity. But that was an interesting thing. I think the right way to handle it is the way the solos made it happen, or really the way Han made it happen, which was everyone gets treated the same and everyone gets shaved. Because like I understand a big part of that was the prejudice against the Ren, but they did not know how these bugs were being transmitted, and you don't want to kill everyone for the sake of stuff that will grow back. So I'm not necessarily against the fact that everybody got shaved. It's kind of funny to me that in Star Wars there's not like magical bacta mist that would just work. But they were on the hind end of space during war with like no resources, so maybe they just didn't have that stuff.
Got some clippers though.
Yeah, but they got the clippers. So I think that was the right way to handle it, and I was glad that like Han didn't necessarily push for no one gets shaved, but rather like no, we're all gonna do it. So
Well,
I
and
think that
I
was
think that
that's good.
it's interesting to see too that everything the Vong does surprises them.
Yeah.
Like it took them so long to realize that the whole moth thing was a
Yeah.
Vong trap. And I think that you could go too far where you think that everything that goes wrong is the Vong, but
Mhm.
that they aren't more suspicious of,
Of all
especially
the
when they
fakes.
know that anyone could be wearing a masker
That's
and
fair.
could
Yeah.
actually be a Vong. Um,
Especially now once they figured out that they made Duro maskers, which is
yeah.
what Nam had on. But yeah, that was funny to me. It's like, let's see. There are these bugs that no one knows existed before right now that can eat technology? Like it wasn't even just like if the bugs just like spat acid or something, like that would be different. But like these things specifically ate like structure. That was the biggest thing. Though, while we're talking about it real quick though, there was the one species, the Vors, which are probably not just from this novel, but they were interesting. They like flew and they needed more room and stuff, and like they could not breathe the atmosphere at all. Like the
They're a
sounds of
lot
it
more
is
fragile.
yeah. It's like it sounded like humans and Ren and stuff could maybe take in a couple of whiffs and be fine, but the Vors specifically were not going to be. And just that's something that's kind of interesting that we have to some extent on Earth. There are some humans that have different allergies, different mental states, different physical abilities. But with Star Wars, with species, you can have such a range of biodiversity, like deciding how do you prioritize and who do you prioritize and why and what makes it fair is exploring it at that big of a scale is interesting.
Any other things you feel like we've left out, or anybody in the chat have any last thoughts
Yeah,
or
we
questions?
didn't talk about recovery as much as I thought we might, but I feel like a lot of that is um there's some characters that got introduced. There was a bit of the gambit on were the people that found their way in with Han going to be good guys or bad guys, and once I knew who they were, because I've read Star by Star, I recognize the names. I'd never read Recovery, um, so I knew what was up, and I was happy to see them for now. um, but that was fun, and just seeing how really like I thought it was funny that Han thought that he should know who every Jedi was.
Right.
Like I get that Luke is his brother-in-law, but like how much time was Han really like hanging out with all the Jedi?
I guess he has more free time than anybody else.
It's true. But yeah, that was funny to me. Um, but then just you got the sense that there was, Luke's Jedi Order is such a different beast than the prequel era Jedi Order. They're polar opposites in so many ways, that they could just kind of be running around and yet they're still doing the kind of stuff that I feel like people wouldn't like. Like there was no Jedi Council, with which is what so many people claim they want, and yet you still had Jedi that were spying on Corellia. And depending on your opinion of Jedi, maybe you wouldn't think it's cool that there's a Jedi spying on Corellia, and that sort of thing. But no, that I think Recovery gave us a good insight into what's going to, what the Jedi are going to be facing, what Leia is going to be facing, the greater political scale that somebody like Sesh is using the Vong invasion to try to move up politically. And it amuses me to no end. Like these people have watched the Vong crash moons onto planets, boil atmospheres, do all of this stuff, and you think any one of them is going to honor any agreement you make with them. Like even the duel between Koran and Shadow Shai in Dark Tide, the Vong still torch the planet.
Right.
Like I don't know. Maybe they just don't believe the reports that the Vong are breaking deal. I guess at some level, it's not like the Republic probably wouldn't think too hard into the Vong breaking a deal with the Hutts because they probably wouldn't care that much about a deal being broken with the Hutts.
They also may not know about it.
Yeah. Um, and so there might be a point of they've mostly betrayed individual planets, but we're the new Republic, and they wouldn't betray us.
And there's
I'm
still some
sure.
of that lingering, just, doubting the scale of what's happening.
Right.
Because, we're still
And
less
just
than
how
a
many
year
there
after
are.
it.
Yep, that's true. And we're only about a third of the way, right? Vector, Dark Tide Duology, Agents of Chaos, Balance Point is book 6 of 19. We're a thirdish of the way through the series.